Good morning. Thank you so much for starting off your Monday with us, starting off another beautiful week here in Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise, joined by Ryan Kalei-Suji, and this is the COVID-19 Care Conversation brought to you by the Hawaii Executive Collaborative and Hawaii Pacific Health, a place where we bring on leaders to talk about the response to the coronavirus pandemic here in the islands. And Ryan, I already see that lots of comments coming in for our guest today.
That's right. Joining us once again will be Governor David Ige. We, of course, will talk to him about some of the efforts and some of the steps moving forward under this COVID-19 pandemic here in the state and how the state continues to, reopen for business as this quarantine levels, as the case levels continue to stay low. We also want to talk to him about some of the events that are happening throughout the country. We recognize that there's a lot of division that's happening, peaceful protests actually happening right here in the islands as well. We want to talk to him a little bit about that and get his take on some of the efforts that are being held here locally and peaceful rallies, and also a call that he had with the president and other governors earlier this morning. So we look forward to talking to Governor Ige in just a few moments. Make sure you enter in your comments right now or questions for the governor. And Yanji, of course, we'd like to start by recognizing and making note of those case levels of COVID-19 here in the state.
That's right. Just one new case on as of noon yesterday, 5 new cases since Friday. Yesterday's new case was from Maui. It's a total of 652 positive cases since the pandemic began. Of course, the majority of those folks, 93%, have recovered. So that's great news. We have not seen any new deaths for almost a month, unchanged since May 3rd, standing at 17. And what's also interesting to note, we are now in a new month, it's June 1st, but in May, the daily count of new cases never exceeded 4. So you're seeing that full flat line, which we love to see. They call it the flattest curve in the country, and we love to see that. But we are seeing also openings of things. This is really the first weekend where people were allowed to gather with members of other households and try to be socially aware, but being in groups of 10 or less. And so we are seeing more people heading to the beach and hanging out with other family members. So we're also going to talk to the governor about some concerns he might have about whether people are still practicing social distancing. Because when you do see those numbers, it feels like some people may feel like, well, why not? Let's just get together. And we still know that we need to be very careful.
That's right. So we want to bring in the governor right now to talk to him a little bit more about these things. Governor, good morning. Great to see you again. We want to first start off by talking about what's happening throughout the country. And we know that just moments ago, you were on a call with the other governors as well as with the president. Could you sort of give us an idea of what that conversation was like and sort of your reaction and your response to what the president had to say about recently what's happening throughout the country?
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Yanji. Thank you again for having me on. I did miss you guys last Monday. As we know, it was a holiday, and I was very happy that I had the opportunity to really pay my respects to those who have given the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of our country. And really just a reminder about what a terrific country we all choose to live in. And Ryan, that was the most disappointing thing to me this morning in the call with the president. There was really no acknowledgement of the horrific and tragic death of George Floyd, and no recognition that there are real grievances in our country, decades, hundreds of years of racial discrimination that we as a country has made progress on, but clearly there is much more work to be done. And I was just horrified that there was no acknowledgement by the president of that whole notion, of the fact that there are real grievances in our communities all across the nation that reacted to the horrific death of George Floyd. So, and certainly all of his talk was about how we needed to really dominate it. Really, a lot of references to taking action, about having superior forces to really quell those who are instigating the looting and rioting and violence all across the country. And I think that that was very disappointing, I think, to all of us as governors, recognizing that this is a time for real leadership from the White House. And I think all of us, regardless of party, felt really disappointed that the president did not understand what his role is as being president for everybody. And really about providing leadership in calming the nation and the world. As you know, the stories have reverberated around the world about the violence that we are seeing because of the lack of progress in these grievances in our community.
It just feels so overwhelming when we think about, you know, the loss of life, over 100,000 now across this country. And then we couple that with the large unemployment rates we're seeing, not only, you know, all around, including right here in the islands. And people are just so angry and so frustrated. And we see, of course, that horrible video of the last moments of his life. I wonder, without that kind of leadership and that kind of vacuum that you're talking about, you know, what are you hearing from the other governors in terms of where we go from here?
You know, we certainly are talking with each other, lessons learned that we can share. You know, we do know that there is a network of people really instigating the violence and rioting. You know, there are many in our community all across the country that want to and desire to peacefully let people know that they are horrified by what has occurred and really want to be very aggressively advocating for change in our community in the way that we do it here in America, which is peaceful through many governmental processes and community dialogues that help us move forward in a very appropriate way. I think all of us recognize that that we need to do better and faster in addressing the grievances of the past. And so as governors, we certainly are sharing information, talking about what we found successful in each of the communities that we lead. And I think most importantly amongst the governors, really understanding that we can continue to work together in a positive way for each and every one of our communities.
Well, we want to, of course, bring in viewer questions. A lot of it centered still around COVID-19. Bringing up a question from, looks like Elisa, when is the plan for lifting inter-island quarantine? We know that there has been some talk that a decision or announcement could be making soon. Is there anything you can tell us about the inter-island quarantine happening?
Yeah, certainly we are making final decision today. So we'll be making an announcement this afternoon. So I know that many have asked, why can't we do it faster, right? I just really wanted to provide the context. You know, we know that Hawaii started without COVID-19. There was no virus in the islands. And it came here because of travel and mostly because of residents traveling out of state, getting infected somewhere and bringing it back. And I first ordered the 14-day mandatory quarantine for all incoming to the state. And as we saw cases on Oahu and Maui be substantially higher than they were on Hawaii Island or Kauai, it became obvious that we needed to stop inter-island travel or manage inter-island travel as well. So I did order the inter-island quarantine, and it has been successful. You know, we do see low rates across the state now. You know, first, Kauai was definitely the first county to bring it under control. You know, they're 5 or 6 weeks now without a case. And slowly, Oahu and Maui County has gotten control of it. So now across the state, there is equal virus activity. So what, Ryan, I think what's most important is, you know, we're trying to get back to normal. And we knew that the quarantine allowed us to to level the playing field and really squash the virus within the entire state. So as we reopen our economy, we know that we have to get visitors from out of the state, or else we'll never be able to rehire people. But we believe that dropping the inter-island quarantine allows us to test what new systems will be put in place so that we can welcome visitors from outside of the state. So I can tell you that it'll be different, that traveling inter-island will not be the same as traveling inter-island before. We will be announcing new procedures and things that we are asking the community to support. We do know that virus traveling county to county from out of state into the state is what's going to reinfect our community again. And in order to keep everyone safe, we need to manage the flow of people, and the opportunity for the virus to infect each other is what the quarantine allows us to do.
So it will be a lifting of the quarantine. We don't have to do the 14-day, mandatory staying at home or in a hotel room or what have you, but it does sound like you will be tracking people. Can you give us any more details about what that actually looks like?
Right. So I think it's, and remember, Yanji, it's only for inter-island, right? I mean, incoming from out of state will still be subject to the mandatory quarantine. It's really about trying to capture information so that we can contact people when they travel. So similar to what we're doing with quarantine, we'll be asking you, your residence, your home address, and then where you'll be staying on neighbor islands, and some flight information so that we can know where you came from and where you traveled to. And then we are creating the foundation for staying in touch with you. So we'll be taking a health screening, doing a temperature scan, making sure that no one has traveled to out of state and visited any of the other communities where the virus is actively being circulated, and that you have no symptoms. And so if you can, then that's great, and we'll check on with you should you develop symptoms. We want to be able to help you, get you to healthcare if you need it, and then test if that's really what's necessary. But so it's really establishing a broader connectivity with people who travel so that we can provide them healthcare and testing if necessary as they're traveling.
So if this is the test for the, sort of the test case for when we welcome people from the mainland and out of the country, what's the lag time? How long do you need to see that this works before you welcome in people from other communities outside of our state?
So, I mean, just as we were careful with allowing inter-island travel, Yunji, the real question is, how do we allow travel from outside of the state? And we are focused in those communities that have a similar experience with the virus. So first and foremost, we'll be looking at those communities with very low virus incidence. On the international side, we're looking at, New Zealand. Everybody talks about New Zealand and Australia as first candidates that we would be interested. And then obviously from an economic perspective, Japan and Korea, South Korea are very important markets. And, the incidence of virus in those countries are much lower than they are in the US. So we are clearly, so the whole notion is identifying communities where the virus is circulating close or equivalent, so that as we begin travel, the risk of infection here in the islands is low, because the rate of transmission in those countries or those communities are very similar to the islands. Likewise, on the domestic, we'd be looking for the same kinds of things. What states do we see low virus transmission rates? I've talked with Governor Dunleavy in Alaska. Their numbers are very similar to ours. Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. I know that they're not hotbeds for travel to the islands, but clearly we know those communities see virus transmission like we do here in the islands. And, we would be targeting and seeing if we can encourage those people to come to the islands. The big concern are, and as you look at California, California is really spiking right now. I know that's an important market for our islands, but the rate of infection in California is really skyrocketing right now, and I really don't believe it would be safe from a health perspective to encourage travelers from California to be in the islands right now.
Another question that we want to ask, of course, always comes down to about unemployment and this continued backlog that we're experiencing and that people are still waiting. We have comments coming in about people still having issues. We've talked to Director Murakami about some of the things and the efforts that they're putting forth moving forward. But there's also some concern about those funds running out. What can you say about sort of what the state has budgeted for unemployment benefits and how that's going to be extended beyond the initial deadline, the initial date that we were given later this month about when those funds will last still?
Certainly, Ryan, I can assure everyone that we will not run out of funds to pay unemployment benefits that people have earned. So I just really want to ensure everyone. We've already processed the paperwork for a loan from the federal government that would allow us, once we deplete the state fund, the funds in the state trust fund, we would be able to transfer and get access to federal funds so that we can continue to pay out the benefits to those who are unemployed. So I really want to emphasize that, and people should not worry about the fund getting drained to zero because we will be able to get funds from the federal government to plug any gap. We continue to work. We've paid out 75% of the claims filed, and that last 25%, I know that it's 60,000 or so applications that are in the system. We continue to work through that. I'm certain that Scott has told you before, they're the more complicated cases, and there's really no simple way to resolve them other than one by one, talking with the employers and those employees who were laid off and really resolving the discrepancies. So, we continue to advocate. It's a priority in my cabinet meetings to have the volunteers who hundreds of them who have really allowed us to tackle the biggest part of the backlog. This last group is the one that's the hardest. And you've seen the stories about fraud and rings of people that are really exploiting this unemployment insurance challenge all across the country. And we have seen attacks on our website, and so we knew something was up. And so we definitely want to be careful about bad actors abusing the system and taking money from those who really need it the most.
Mindy has a question about those federal funds. She says, does Hawaii have to pay back the federal funds? How will we do that? I think that we can borrow a lot of money, but at some point we have to pay it back.
Certainly, and that's one of the concerns that I have and my administration has. Yes, the federal government will loan us the money. The way unemployment insurance works then is all employers pay an unemployment tax, and obviously that would go up as we begin to pay down the loan. We can take action to defer that as long as we can. And one of the reasons, we're not rushing to spend all the CARES Act. I do believe that that's the best way that I can help the broadest cross-section of the business community here in the islands. If we have to borrow, $1.5 billion, and the businesses have to pay that back, it would be a burden that they would carry for a decade at least. If we can take $500 million of the CARES Act and really buy down the loan, that can have significant savings for all of the businesses in the long run. And that's what we're looking at.
I want to ask a question about the process that the legislature has taken. We spoke to Speaker Psyche last week and their decision to sort of put money aside back into the rainy day fund instead of using some of that money right now. Them allocating money from the state budget as well as the money coming in from the federal government. We have people that were asking about that decision last week. What are your thoughts on the legislature's decision to sort of move money into that account?
I think it's just a terrible decision. Putting it in the rainy day fund means that we won't have access to it. And the administration had commented in our testimony that putting all of those funds in the rainy day funds means that we can't get access to it unless there's legislative action. So we certainly suggested that they not do that. It really does create a problem. It almost forces me to look at furloughs and layoffs because if I can't get access to funds in the rainy day fund unless the legislature is in session and can appropriate that. And I know that they're planning to come back in June, and so we can have that conversation, but it doesn't really help us deal with the real fiscal challenges that we see if we have to have the legislature in session in order to access those funds.
Is there sort of a drop dead deadline on that, on the point where you have to then make a decision on furloughs and layoffs?
Certainly, as you know, the Council on Revenues made their projections, and it was very similar to what we anticipated. $2.25 billion shortfall is just huge, and we definitely are going to do everything we can. We are frustrated as governors. We've been engaged with the White House on a weekly basis. We made it clear to them that we need every state across the country needs help right now. And the CARES Act funds for state governments were very, very limited. Essentially, they said I couldn't plug my budget hole. I couldn't use it to replace revenues. So essentially, we could only use it for new programs in response to COVID-19, which doesn't help me avoid layoffs or doesn't help me avoid furloughs. So, I think that's the challenge. So the federal government is really not standing up to help states. The legislature here has really put all of the resources that I need to avoid those layoffs and furloughs into a rainy day fund that prohibits me from getting access to it. So my hands are being tied on both ends, and that really is not helpful.
We're going to ask a question regarding the military and some of the bases and some of the decisions that are being made about those who, of course, are stationed here in Hawaii. There have been reports about some of those military bases. There's gyms open, questions about people that fly in and out of the military, family members of the bases now also saying that if they're moving to Hawaii Station, they're exempt from the 14-day quarantine. What is sort of the relationship right now with the military bases, and do they fall under the jurisdiction of this, the state orders?
They don't, because obviously the military has their own guidelines, but they've been very supportive and careful to implement policies very similar to what we've ordered. As we've ordered masks, even before the big military decided that everyone should wear masks, they did support the mayor's and my action to require everyone to wear a mask when they're around in our community. So for the most part, Ryan, they have been very supportive and have taken steps in parallel. Even though I don't have the authority on military bases, they've actually implemented virtually every restriction that we've ordered. The gyms and activities in the military, part of it is that they can control who's in the gyms. They do have strict quarantines of their personnel. And so certainly they have a very controlled environment, and they know who is circulating. They can schedule people in and out at different times. So they definitely have a lot more control of what happens on base than we would in the general public. And so they are taking appropriate action. Being in the gym and working out is such an important part of just the readiness for the men and women in uniform. And so they definitely need to be able to do those things, just as our frontline firefighters have needed to get in their exercise and do the things that they need to do to be ready. So I just really want to assure the public that they are complying with the spirit of what we're asking. even though they do have more control, they definitely don't want to have a COVID-19 outbreak on any of the bases, and so they are taking precautions. I know that, and there's been a big issue about family members who are relocating to our community. It is challenging for those who are unable to get housing on the bases now, right? I mean, because for those family members who are being reassigned and being stationed in Hawaii, if you don't have priority to be in housing on the base, then you're in the open market. And if they don't have the ability to be able to search for a place to rent, be able to settle their children in schools, there's just a lot of activities that the family and the spouse of the military member have to do that allows them to be settled, that
Unfortunately, I don't know if we're going to get
in
that.
instances outside. Sorry.
No problem.
You guys, I'm sorry we lost. But I mean, so there are similar kinds of structures in place, and they are not a risk to the broader community.
I know that you have your weekly call or your every other day call with the mayors, so we're going to let you go. But just lastly, I wanted to ask you, we're seeing a lot of people gathering now that the restriction has been lifted to allow, 10 or less. But it is graduation season. People are antsy after being in the house for so long. You look at social media, there are plenty of people who are gathering in rather large groups. What are your concerns? Because when people see that, no more than 4 cases a day, many times 0 in the month of May, they do feel like they can relax. What's your message to the public about these gatherings that we've been seeing over the weekend?
My message to the public is just, we have to live with COVID-19, and it's a very infectious and a very deadly disease. And going forward, we need to take personal responsibility and manage our interactions with other people, or we will see another spike. I think right now, the virus is not circulating broadly in our community, and certainly we see the desire to get out and socialize. But I just really want to ask everyone to maintain the discipline of limiting social interactions, because we do want to recover and reopen our economy, and we will be bringing more visitors into the islands in a very measured way. And we need to live on personal responsibility for the foreseeable future until there's a vaccine or a very effective treatment that would allow us to do away with all these special treatments and restrictions and get back to how it used to be. Unless we maintain discipline, it won't take very much to see a spike in cases here in the islands.
All right, Governor Ige, thank you for spending time with us again on this Monday. We know that you have to go off to speak to the mayor, so we will let you go. But thank you again for joining us and answering our questions.
And stay tuned for this afternoon's announcement.
We will. We will be. Thank you.
Well, good to hear from the governor there. Interesting to hear his thoughts on his conversation with the other governors and the president earlier this morning, talking about all of the protests and violence that we've been seeing on the mainland over the weekend. And a lot of you are asking still about the inter-island quarantine. As he just mentioned, they are going to make an announcement later this afternoon. And if you missed the top of this broadcast, just when the video's finished, you can go back and scroll back and see our conversation. But Ryan, he did kind of give us some information about how inter-island travel will be opening soon, but it'll be different.
That's right, including tracking some of the, those travelers that travel between the islands, taking names, he was saying, taking information. Again, we would see this with people from out of state coming in. Usually when you travel inter-island, you don't have to go through that process, but they're looking to implement that. We also know that there's going to be a walkthrough that's actually happening as well at the airport this afternoon. So the media is going to be invited to that as well. So make sure that you stay tuned here to the Honolulu Star Advertiser for updates as this plan sort of gets released, I guess, this afternoon. And no doubt we'll have an exact date of when that lift will be happening in a few hours.
Yeah, and it's going to look very different. And also, it's interesting for him to talk about that. That's really a test case to see how those systems work, not necessarily just how the virus is spreading, but how long does it take to take everybody's temperature? How long does it take to track all that information? That's sort of the test to then open up some of those bubbles. He talked about Australia, New Zealand, potentially Japan and South Korea. And then looking at individual states, can we sort of create a travel bubble with a state like Alaska or Montana or some of the Wyoming, some of these other states? Of course, it's fairly easy to drive to one of those airports. Let's say if you come from a neighboring state, so it's hard to see how that actually is really implemented. But they're thinking about everything, but because of course everyone wants to get back to work.
Yeah, I mean, just logistically, that may be a little more difficult with those states. I mean, we don't have direct flights from Montana to Honolulu, so we'll see how some of those adjustments will have to be made with those travel bubbles. We also heard sort of his thoughts on what the legislature is doing with the CARES money, saying that he does not agree that it should be put in the rainy day funds. He believes that this is a time for the state to be using those resources right now. He recognizes that we are at a point where, as many people are saying, it's raining right now in Hawaii. And he recognizes that and says that he wished that the legislature would allow the opportunity to use that money right now rather than put it aside in the rainy day fund. But the legislature is saying that they will be back in session in the middle of June to sort of address some of these things. Right now, it's sort of just put on hold for them to kind of think through how they're going to manage that. But as of right now, they want to move that funds in there. So we'll see how this sort of all plays out in the relationship between lawmakers in the legislature and the administration, and how they're going to go about in trying to figure out how to fix the budget, but also provide the needed services that are coming in.
Of course, what Governor Ige and all governors around the country want is more federal relief. We're going to be talking to Senator Brian Schatz tomorrow on this program to find out if there are any moves to, provide another stimulus package, either to individuals, to businesses, or to state governments, because it's not just Hawaii. Of course, state governments across the country are all hurting and wanting to have some kind of relief. So we're looking forward to our talk with Senator Schatz. On Wednesday, we have another Ask the Doctor segment. We love to hear from the medical community right now. And then we're going to be hearing more from travel, and not necessarily from political leadership, but from the business side. So Mufi Hanneman from the Hotel, Tourism and Lodging Association will be here on Thursday. And then Friday, we have Hawaiian Airlines' Peter Ingram is going to be with us.
That's right. So looking forward to those discussions and those conversations. But of course, we always like to end with highlighting some of the good that's happening in the community. And at a time like this, where there's seemingly so much division and it's hard to see and find those good news, there's a lot that are still happening out there. And we are seeing the community continuing to rally together. Our Hawaii Hero, once again, continues to help. And one of the people or organizations that we like to highlight is the IBEW Local 1186 sponsored a 1-hour musical tribute over the weekend.
That's right. It was called From Our Hearts to Yours. It was to raise money for 3 local nonprofits, for Hawaii Food Bank, Adult Friends of Youth, and raise awareness also and money for the Blood Bank of Hawaii. They gave a shout out, of course, to the 2020 graduates. We love those graduates as well. What a time to be graduating. IBEW Local 1186 represents more than 3,500 members, from electricians, telecom, spectrum technicians, call center employees. They do great work in our community. And this aired on Thursday. It reran over the weekend. It featured a lot of the artists that you see right there, a lot of local favorites. Wonderful to see the community coming together, gathering around music, and supporting those 3 very deserving nonprofits.
Yeah, and again, we continue to encourage everybody to do what you can to help support the community by giving, or giving of your time or resources, or whatever you can to sort of help those in need. Again, this is a critical time for our state. We're seeing so many people suffering, and whatever you can do to be your own hero in your own small way would be appreciated. But we always like to highlight those that are doing exceptional work in our community. And we encourage all of you to please let us know your Hawaii Hero and the people that are helping in your communities, as we'd like to spotlight them as well. Again, we are looking forward to another great week ahead of us with a number of guests. We'd like to, again, thank our sponsors, the Hawaii Executive Collaborative and Hawaii Pacific Health, for bringing this conversation to all of you, the viewers. Again, we recognize there always seems to be a lot of questions for Governor Ige. We try our best to sort of condense it as best as we can to cover a wide variety of topics. But as you can tell, the half hour goes by pretty quickly with the governor, with so many topics and things. But we appreciate everybody for continuing to turn in and support this broadcast.
Yeah, and he will be joining us next Monday as well. So we'll go through all these comments and questions, and we'll make sure to pose them to him as best we can, as Ryan said, condensing those down so that we stay on topic and focused. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe, take care of yourselves and one another. Stay with the Honolulu Star-Advertiser for the governor's information, his press conference later this afternoon, talking about the inter-island quarantine. A lot of you have questions, so do we. So we look forward to getting some more specifics from the governor later this afternoon. So until then, until tomorrow, we wish you a fond aloha. Take care of yourself.
Aloha. We'll see you tomorrow.